Hey, truth lovers, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truther Ministries. The topic of today's video is titled, What is Bigfoot? So I'm going to be talking about Bigfoot today. I'm going to be talking about Sasquatch, which is really the better term for Bigfoot. Bigfoot's kind of the more popular term. I'm going to be talking about what it is and just kind of giving kind of an overview of some of the topics that come up when you talk about this topic. Now, Bigfoot is a topic that I've started to cover more on this channel really the past few months. It's really been this past year, 2024, that I've started to talk about Bigfoot. I had covered giants before on this channel, but really some of this stuff with cryptids and especially Sasquatch in general is something that I've really been getting into more. And even the videos I've put out the past few months, I've done videos where I've gone out looking for Sasquatch and I've shown the tree structures and I've talked about some of the arguments for Bigfoot a little bit, but I haven't specifically talked about really in detail the academic arguments that can be made for Bigfoot. So I'm going to be talking about what are some of the evidences that have been given for Bigfoot. I'm going to be talking about some of the theories about what is Bigfoot. I'm going to be talking about kind of some of the attribute things that are attributed to Bigfoot, his abilities, whatever, and just kind of giving everybody an introduction to Sasquatch. So that's really going to be the goal of this video, and just to really, I hope everybody who watches this video, you can walk away saying, wherever you're at with this issue of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, that you can say, okay, I feel like I have some more understanding of this issue than I did before. And I really want to start today by talking about kind of what has been my personal journey in coming to really believe in Bigfoot, and not only believe in him, but really start to invest more of my time into researching Bigfoot, which, because alongside really the bread and butter of what I've been doing with Reformed Truth Through Ministries, especially the past few months, it's been research into giants, cryptids, um, kind of the aliens or the grays. I've talked about that, but all of that stuff, there's been more of an emphasis on anthropology and archaeology, and it's been a slightly different emphasis than some of the videos I've talked about in the past, where a lot of the videos I did were on secret societies and political stuff, and this has been a new direction, and this has been partially because of some of the stuff of the journey that God's been leading me on, and I've been surprised and not surprised all at the same time. Really, I think, for years and years, I've always loved history. I've always loved some of the interesting things about history that haven't been talked about. I mean, ever since I was a kid, I've read about. I remember as a kid, I would read about World War II, and read about the Civil War and the American Revolution, and obviously those. As a kid, I read a lot about wars because it's all action and battles, whatever. As I got older, I started to, things like secret societies were interesting. Things like the Freemasons and the Jesuits and the Illuminati and all that is kind of, and when I got saved as a teenager, I developed a love for church history, and started to learn about the Protestant Reformation and these great figures. I learned about the Great Awakening and Spurgeon and found so much inspiration, and over time learned about figures of church history that are less well known. You learn about guys like John Gill and William Huntington, or Christmas Evans, or you learn about all these inspiring figures of church history. But cryptids and giants and Bigfoot, those were not things that I really got into all that much. I feel like as I did research through a lot of my 20s over the years, I came to believe, my worldview believed that, okay, God is sovereign over everything. This is what I believe. I believe God is sovereign over everything. I believe in predestination, that everything happens under God control, that God has ultimate authority over the nations. But that being said, Satan is, quote, called the lowercase g God of this world, or he's called the prince of the power of the air, or the prince of this world. Those are multiple references to Satan in the New Testament. And what that means is that Satan deceives many of the world leaders, and we live in a world where there are many deceptions and lies And those are things that are called conspiracy theories. And it's not that we, as Christians, we don't want to be obsessed with the darkness. We don't want to be obsessed with always fixating on evil. We want to be filling our hearts and our minds and our souls with the light more than the darkness. But I mean, I've come over time, I came to really believe, and as I've researched history, this validates this. I've come to believe we're not inherently good as human beings. We're inherently evil because we've fallen into sin. I developed a worldview where things like lies and deceptions and conspiracies are possible and real, and any objective study of history is going to validate those things. So I developed a worldview where I've really believed for many years that it is really, we live in a world where not everything we're told at face value is necessarily true. And some people would call that a more conspiratorial worldview, or I would say that, or what you call being a truther, whatever it is. And the reason I'm mentioning all this is because I didn't really believe in Bigfoot or cryptids or all that early on. I was never against it. I never scoffed at it or went, "Oh, that's stupid." But I hadn't gotten to that point where I was interested in it. I hadn't invested any real time. But I had a worldview where I've developed a worldview where once I've encountered this material, I was prepared for it, because you can't really get into Bigfoot or Sasquatch or cryptids without getting into conspiracies, because the question everybody always asks is, well, if Bigfoot is real, why hasn't anybody found it? Why haven't we pulled a body out of the woods? Why isn't it that all of the anthropologists and all the researchers at all the prominent universities are talking about it? Where's the proof? And the answer to that, which the conclusion you have to come to, is that there has been proof. There have been bodies found. I'm going to get into the proof more in a little bit, but you can't really get into the issue of Bigfoot without getting into conspiracies. Well, really around 2020, 2021, so it's been, that's really when I had really come to believe in things like the New World Order and kind of this conspiracy for the world, but I hadn't really got into any of this cryptid stuff. But I really came to a point where I really, in a meaningful way, encountered the biblical arguments for giants, I was really presented with this material that giants are in the Bible. And I mean, I always believed believed in David and Goliath, and I'm like, if someone had asked me, is Goliath a giant? I would have went, well, of course he's a giant. If someone had said, are giants in the Bible? I think I would have said, yeah, I suppose. But I held for some years to the Sethite view of Genesis 6, and just kind of said, okay, I don't think the pre-flood world is talking about giants. But over time, I really started to encounter a lot of really good material that's been put out on giants. So that was really my introduction. The giants was really my introduction to this world of cryptids. And really, the podcast I've listened to, a lot of their episodes this year, has really been the Blurry Creatures podcast. And it's been a really good podcast. They've interviewed a lot of guys that I've appreciated. They've interviewed L.A. Marzulli multiple times. I really have loved the work of Judd Burton. I've talked about his Institute of Biblical Anthropology. I've even signed up for that. Doug Van Dorn's book on the Giants. They've had Derek Gilbert on there. He's put out some good material. They've had Timothy Alberino on there. And I don't agree with these guys on every issue on anything, but you never do. But I've really appreciated them, and I've listened to that podcast this year. And it's funny how one of the guests on there, or the host, excuse me, the host, um, um, Nate Henry and Luke Rogers, they talk about how Bigfoot was their gateway drug into the Blurryverse. Well, for me, and then they said that kind of opened their mind to think about things like giants, whatever. For me, it's the other way around. I really came to believe, okay, I see giants in my Bible, and that really gradually opened my mind up. Well, if giants are real, could other cryptids be real too? And so I've really had my mind open to this. I think there's something to Bigfoot. I think it's real. There's a lot to this, and that's kind of been my journey of, it's been gradually opened up to my mind that there is more to this issue, that there is Sasquatch out in the woods, and I think there are other cryptids in the world too. And I understand why a lot of people push back against that, because I don't think I sinfully scoffed at that material with cryptids, but when you first encountered it, I kind of went, okay, I don't know. But, with prayer and thinking and time, I've really realized that I think there's something to it. But for me, it's been a journey. So if you're listening to what I'm talking about with this material and you're saying, I don't think Bigfoot's real, or I don't think these other cryptids are real, then I would just encourage you, like, just think about it, pray about it, just let, you don't have to come to an answer right away. It's okay to, like, just let it soak in, and just stew on it, chew on it. Nothing wrong with that. And just over time, you come to realize that, yeah, maybe there is something to this. And really, what I feel like one of the things that God has really been teaching me this year, or emphasizing in a new way to me this year, which has been exciting, is I've really come to realize how spiritual our world really is. We live in the creation, we live in this physical realm. And I've always believed, as a Christian, if someone said, "Do you believe the world's spiritual?" went, "Well, of course I do. Well, of course it's spiritual. It's created by God, who's a spirit." But as I've studied all this stuff, and you realize that these creatures exist that are physical creatures, but there's a spiritual component to all this. And even if some of these things are not good, but they're bad, they're evil, these creatures, the giants, whatever, they've been a menace to humanity. But you realize all that stuff. There's a physical side of these, there's a spiritual side to these things, and you really realize, like, wow, like, our world is really spiritual. And I've never been and I say that I'm not a full on, like, charismatic. I've never been, excesses, but I believe in the supernatural. I do. And it's just, I think if you're all Christians, all true Christians believe in the supernatural. Now we can get into how we define terms and stuff, but that's what this has really been an epiphany for me, that I've always believed that the world is spiritual, but I've come to see that in a fresh way, in a new way. I've come to understand that with new eyes. And even though talking about cryptids, sometimes you talk about cryptids, it gets into some dark places. There's encouragement in the fact that it's just been a great reminder that this is God's world, and God's in control of this world, and there's actually good that has come from understanding that in a fresh way, and I take that as a good thing. So all that being said, that's really been my journey, really getting into Bigfoot, where it's been, with time I went, okay, I think the giants are real, and then it's led me to say, okay, I think Sasquatch is real too. So now I'm going to transition here, and I'm going to start to talk about what is Sasquatch. Now, Bigfoot's kind of the common parlance term, but it's been well known that this creature has existed for a lot of years, and he's existed on the North American continent, and it's believed that he exists in other parts of the world too. But I'm speaking specifically about North American Bigfoot, and there's been a lot of evidence over the years for Sasquatch, for Bigfoot, that have come about. Now, the Native Americans have believed in this creature for generations, and the term Sasquatch is a term that he's been referred to by Native American tribes. And other Native American tribes have even referred to him as the Sabe. People like the Ojibwe tribes in North America, or the Dakota, these tribes have referred to him as Sabe, or Sasquatch. I think Sasquatch is probably the most common term for this creature, and he's usually very tall, or sometimes described as being around 8 foot tall, having a conical head, usually brown skin. And there's subvarieties of this creature. Some of them are taller and larger, some of them are smaller, some look more human-like, some look more ape-like. And that shouldn't become as a surprise, because, I mean, you think about it, we have, white-tailed deer as an example. They exist all across North America, but there's over 20 subvarieties of white-tailed deer, and they're different niches to this creature depending on what part of the North American continent you're living in. And this is true for animals or creatures all across the world. You look at humans all across the world, they look different or act different, different cultures. So that really shouldn't surprise us that there could be subvarieties of Sasquatch. But that's really the description of this creature, that walks on two legs like a man, like a human being, very intelligent, you know, it stays in the woods, lives and is very, very good at avoiding human beings and seems to have a real desire to avoid human beings. And there's so one of the chief evidences for the proof of Sasquatch really is the Native American myths and legends. And I think that we often dismiss the Native American belief systems as mere superstition. Now, obviously, many of them in their tribal religions have had an emphasis on worshiping spirits. It's obviously not been Christianity, biblical religion. So obviously, I don't think that everything that Native Americans have believed is real, but it doesn't mean that they haven't had real, true understanding of the world which they've lived in, and that hasn't been preserved in their belief system and their myths and legends. I think the word myth has often been really villainized and demonized in our society, where myths have always been stories that they're not necessarily 100% true, but that they can come from a true factual emphasis. And this is something that I've really been learning as I've been listening to Dr. Judd Burton. He talks about this all the time in all the stuff he's talked about in videos online. And he's talked about how myths come from a root origin, and that for me has been extremely helpful. So this is true of the Native American facts and legends, but that is by no means the extent of the evidence for Sasquatch. Yes, there's that's one category of evidence for him, but we know that many what we would call in the United States, non-Native Americans have encountered him. There's a great example where Teddy Roosevelt, in one of the books that he wrote, there's this great account where I don't have the quotation in front of me, but he talks about how he described this hairy beast in the woods, this Bigfoot Sasquatch creature, because it's famously known that Teddy Roosevelt was a big game hunter, and he would go to various parts of the world and hunt large game, and he was out hunting, and he described what is indisputably this Bigfoot Sasquatch creature. So I found that as I've been researching, like, wow, an American president gives this description of what is Bigfoot. That's really, really something to see. And thousands of people across the United States and across the world have given evidence to seeing these. So there's a great deal of anecdotal evidence for this creature. Now, I think with like anything in the world, some people make up stories. That's certainly true. Some people are BSing. Some people are lying or deceiving. And there's people who get into stuff for money or for if you're in that world, if you want influence, you want whether it's influence on your internet influence or in that, you know, power, money, whatever. Like people have so many motivations to make things up. So I'm not saying every story is true because if I've listened to them, I've listened to many stories of people claiming to see Bigfoot. There's many that I've listened to that I believe are true, and then I think there have been ones where people are not, they're exaggerating or they're not telling the whole story. But even if a large number of them are untrue, if even if it was 5%, that's still 5% of people who have truly seen it. Thousands and thousands of people have claimed to see this creature, and I think it just gets to the point where you just can't dismiss everything. That's where I've come to with researching the giants, where you read all of these newspaper clippings of these mounds that were built across North America hundreds or thousands of years ago. And archaeologists in the 1800s and the early 1900s dug into these mounds, and they dug up giant bones, skeletons 8 to 12 feet tall. And even, in the 19th century, newspapers would exaggerate and there was sensationalism. They would try to sell newspapers. And I'm not saying every newspaper clipping from that time period is true. But that being said, even if a large number of them were false, that could still be dozens or hundreds of counts of true people who found giant bones in the mounds. You just get to the point where every story can't be a lie, where you get to hundreds or thousands of accounts. And so I think that's what's true with the giants. that all of these newspaper clippings can't be false, that there have been skeletons found in these mounds, and it's been covered up by places like the Smithsonian. And I think this is true for the evidence for Bigfoot. Of the thousands and thousands of people who have gone in the woods and seen this creature and sometimes have had their life change. It can be a very traumatic experience, especially if you're not prepared for it. It can really shatter your worldview if you really aren't prepared to believe in it. It can really change the way you view the world. And sometimes people think that people who look into Bigfoot or believe in Bigfoot or research Bigfoot are these obsessed tinfoil hat wearing um, kind of lunatics and conspiracy theorists, crazy people who are just obsessed, and they think, oh, well, these people just believe in it, and then they're just spending their whole life going and trying to find evidence that's not there. A lot of times it's the other way around. A lot of times people who end up researching Bigfoot is people who prior to having experience really didn't care at all. They really were indifferent to Bigfoot, didn't believe in it, really didn't care of it. It really had no prominence in their life. And sometimes they'll be out camping or whatever and they'll see this thing and they'll have their life change. And so what do? You got to try to make sense of what you just saw, what you just experienced. And what will you do? You'll start researching because you're gonna want answers to explain this huge experience. There's so many stories of people who have told stories along those lines. They're saying I didn't really care to research it until I had an experience, and now once I had that, my life was changed, and I wanted to make sense of it. And so, sometimes we imply that it's people are just they're obsessed and they're getting into it and they're trying to make something of it. But a lot of times people only start looking into it because the issue, as it were, has been forced upon them. But yeah, I've talked about evidence. I've talked about the Native American beliefs and legends. I mentioned the story of Teddy Roosevelt's account of it. I've talked about the anecdotal evidence of the thousands upon thousands of people have seen it. I think the most prominent uh, evidence that we have at this point would be the Patterson Gimlin film. If you don't know what the Patterson Gimlin film, it was filmed by these two men. That's why it's called the Patterson and Gimlin film. These two men, they were in the redwoods of California, and I think it's 1967 is the year. And they were up there, camping, hiking, whatever, and they came across this creature, and it's this the Bigfoot creature. It walks across this river area, this clearing by this river in the woods of Northern California, and they caught it on video. And when you look at it, some people try to claim it's fake. Some people have tried to claim that it's a man in the suit. When you look at the video closely, you see that this is a creature walking, and you see the muscles, and you see, the breasts or the chest muscle. Many people believe that Patty, as the creature has been called, that it's a female. They believe it's a female Sasquatch. They believe that it's a female anatomy. When you look at the intricacy of the muscles moving on that creature as it's walking, it's very, very unlikely that that was faked. I mean, I just would say if you're really skeptical, go look at that time, the 1960s, they're making the Planet of the Apes movies. And for the time, very good special effects, with the makeup and whatever. Guys like John Chambers, do all this makeup for the Planet of the Apes movies. But you look at the realism of that creature, and you would say with what they were able to do, where the technology was at that time, it would be very, very difficult to really fake it with a home video in the California redwoods. I mean, especially if it's just a couple guys out there. I mean, so the skeptics have tried to say, oh, they put a guy in a suit and they made it up, which that's a very dismissive line of argument. But when you watch the Patterson Gimlin film, and I've posted a stabilized version of it on my own YouTube channel because it's not at this point, it's not copyrighted. But it's the same video as the original. But when you watch the original, the camera shakes a lot. So when I say a stabilized version, the content's unchanged. It's just the camera. It's just been stabilized so the camera isn't moving. But that's it in a nutshell. But you say if that, let's just say for the sake of argument, I believe it is that that's true footage. Well, there you go. We've caught it on video. That's explicit proof. Some people they really try to dismiss that and explain it away, but I really think I really do think that it is authentic footage, and I think it would have been very very hard to fake that at a high level, and I think that's part of the reason why it's endured the test of time for some decades at this point. And there's other evidence as well. There's if you want more of a I just talked about the Patterson Gimlin film. That's visual video documentation. If you're looking more at the audio side of things, there has been these sounds called the Sierra sounds. They were put out by a guy named, they were captured by a guy called Ron Moorhead. Really, really interesting. And um, yeah, you listen to them. There's this many very strange sounds, and they've been attributed to Bigfoot. That's not as explicit, in my opinion, as the Patterson Gimlin film. But if you're really looking into Sasquatch, it really would behoove you to research the Sierra sounds put out by Ron Moorhead that were captured in the woods by Ron Moorhead. That's very very unique and interesting audio that he captured. But there's been real academics who have really looked into this. I think one of the chief academics that have really looked into this is Dr. Jeff Meldrum, PhD, University of Idaho, and he's really believed in Sasquatch for years and years, and he faced some real pushback and criticism from his colleagues in academia because of his belief in Sasquatch. But there are academics who have believed in it. There are PhDs who have believed in it. It's obviously suppressed as a whole by the academic establishment. But there's just smart guys who have looked into this and believe in it. And there's guys that are credible that have really done a lot of work on the issue of Sasquatch. And and for me, like guys like L.A. Marzulli, where he's had a ministry for years and years of researching this stuff, and he's talked about giants, and he's talked about elongated skulls, and he's talked about these megaliths across the world. And one of the things that I've realized they talked about, like he's like, oh yeah, I believe in Sasquatch, and he talked about how he believes it's a descendant of the Nephilim. That's one of the theories. I'm going to get into that in a second here. But like you have Christians who are doing really good research on these other topics, and you're like, and that for me was like a connect the dots moment. It's like, wait a minute, he's talking about the giants and the Nephilim, and he's saying that the Bigfoot Sasquatch thing fits right in together. For me, that was such a connect the dots moment, and that's been really helpful. So if you're a Christian and you believe that the spiritual is real, that our world is physical but it's spiritual, you believe in the supernatural, and that doesn't mean you're superstitious or you're given over to excess in how you conduct yourself, but you believe in the power of God and the power of the enemy. Like you should be in a worldview where you're comfortable to believe that I may not understand everything about these creatures, but it doesn't mean that they're not real. We don't realize how much we've been so influenced by movements like the Enlightenment and rationalism, and where we really in the 1700s and the 1800s and even into the 1900s, the 20th century, where we really the worldview we had before was a very supernatural worldview, and the Enlightenment and rationalism really was trying to get away from all that. We moved to deism and we moved to secularism, and eventually Darwinian evolution came on the scene. That's a little bit after the Enlightenment. But these movements had tremendous effect on Western society. And even conservative Bible believing Christians, even though we've stiff armed a lot of that stuff, and rightly so, it doesn't mean that we haven't been, we've been influenced by those worldviews more than we realize. And we can scoff at stuff that we really shouldn't scoff at if we're not careful. And if we really have a Bible believing spiritual paradigm, we should be comfortable living in a world where things that we don't understand can be out there. And that just because we don't understand them doesn't mean that they're not real. Yeah, we need to have wisdom, we need to have discernment, but but that's the point I'm making, is that these things are real. Now, that being said, I'm going to get into some of the theories of kind of what some people believe, like what is Sasquatch, what is Bigfoot. And there's a couple of different theories that could put out by whether secular researchers, or I'm going to talk about theories put out by Christian researchers. And the first one is that some people believe that it's just simply a very ancient creature. Some people have thought it's some form of a gigantopithecus, or that it's just some creature that's very, very old that's existed on the earth. In the Christian fear, there's a lot of people who have considered that view that are kind of in the more of the old Earth creationist view, or hold to even a pre-Adamic paradigm. I really do come down on the young Earth creationist view. There's men who I've listened to on stuff like the Nephilim, whatever, who are old Earth creationists. I don't agree, but I don't disrespect that. But one of these views is that, yeah, it's just a creature that's very, very old, that survived for thousands or even millions of years. A second view, and this is the view that I've listened to L.A. Marzulli holds, and this is the view that I really come down to, that this creature is some type of a descendant of the Nephilim. Now, obviously, it's obviously a different creature from the giant, so there's distinguishment. But that, well, when I say descendant, that it's coming from, in some way, shape, or form, that this creature has come down from that reality of the angels and the men, pre-flood world. And what Ellie Marzulli has talked about time and time again is that when you really get a good look at Sasquatch, and you see this especially in the Patterson Gimlin film, it has that exact same conical head that you see with giants and that you see with the elongated skulls around the world. So it really does tie into that Genesis 6 reality. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because that really connects the dots. It's like, okay, you believe in giants, and then when you study giants, you start to get into the elongated skulls, and you're like, okay, the Sasquatch thing is fitting, like that those puzzle pieces connect together. That makes sense to me. That makes a lot of sense. So really following Marzulli, that's really where I'm coming down with it at this point. Yes, it's distinguished from a giant, but I think that it's some type, shape, or form, some type of a descendant from the Nephilim in the Genesis 6 paradigm. There's a lot of conjecture to this. None of us have all the answer. None of us have sat down and had a cup of coffee with Bigfoot and say, hey, what are you, man? So everybody admits to one extent, none of us have all the answers, but we're trying to make sense of it. We're trying to figure out what the answers are. And then the third view that's often put around, some people have propose that it's some type of a chimera or hybrid. And I would say this is a potential view. Like, this is something that is possible. When you read the book of Enoch and it talks about the pre-flood world, it talks about how the watchers that came down on Mount Hermon, they not only did they procreate with human women and create a race of giants, but that they sinned against all of the various types of animals, and that hybrids existed upon the earth. Now, some people will find this very hard to believe if you haven't really done the research on the Genesis 6 paradigm and the pre-flood world, but it's amazing to me. The Book of Enoch, I don't believe the Book of Enoch's expired, but I think there's true history in that book. It's talking about what we would essentially call genetic manipulation, and this is something that we couldn't even have understood until really the past 100 years, 150 years, whatever. It's really been just the 20th century, the 21st century, where we've really come to genetically understand. We've come to understand genetics on a scientific level. And I mean, you think of things like centaurs and minotaurs, like a half horse, half man, or a half bull, half man. These hybrids that are portrayed in mythology. This is going back to what I said before, that mythology are stories that are not necessarily 100% factual, but they come from a historical origin, some point in the past. Well, that's what this is talking about. In the pre-flood world with the Watchers, the Book of Enoch says they sinned against all the various types of animals, and it literally talks about hybrids, or what we call chimeras, existing upon the earth. And we see portrayals of those types of creatures in whether it's Greek mythology or other types of mythology. You think of things like the Cyclops with the one eye, Medusa, the snake hair. I mean, there's just all of these examples found in the ancient world. In ancient Egypt, some of the gods, the head with the dog, the dog head, human body. The Egyptian god, I think it's an Anubis. And there's just so many portrayals of these type of chimeras. It's possible that Sasquatch could be some type of a chimera or a hybrid. I don't, like I said, I really kind of follow Marzulli on this with the descendant of the Nephilim view, but it's possible that it could be some type of a hybrid or a chimera. Now, we obviously don't know, but there's a lot of conjecture to it. But those are kind of some of the views that have been presented that I've listened to, especially amongst Christian researchers, that I would say are those are kind of the three views that I've heard the most and are the most credible and make the most sense. So I come down on number two, but you can do your own research and come to your own conclusions. Now, at this point, I'm going to kind of get into in the Bigfoot world or the Sasquatch world, there's really kind of two camps that really emerge. And sometimes these camps are kind of at ends with each other. There's the non-supernatural view of Bigfoot or Sasquatch, and then there's the supernatural view. Now, the non-supernatural view, as the name would suggest, there are people that really strongly believe that Bigfoot is simply a creature in the woods, maybe a creature that's a little bit more human-like than other creatures, but there's nothing supernatural going on with it. It eats, it poops, it forages, it lives in the woods, it avoids humans very effectively, but there ain't nothing supernatural to it. And people in that camp at times will get very, very offended, or they'll get very, very defensive. But people on the other view that claim that Bigfoot has supernatural abilities. But then in contrast, there's this other view that in the Bigfoot world or the Sasquatch world, there are people that believe that Bigfoot has supernatural or paranormal abilities. And I really do come down on this view. I really do believe that there is a supernatural component to Bigfoot. And this makes a lot of sense to me because this would really help to explain why I do believe people have pulled bodies of Bigfoots out of the woods. There have been stories that have been told by hunters, whatever, that have been credible. And I think there has been a government cover up of Sasquatch. I mean, in the UFO world, you'll hear of the Men in Black. If anybody sees any evidence related to UFOs or, quote, the aliens or the grays, the government will show up on your door and they'll, essentially get rid of the evidence. Well, I think there's a similar thing going on with Bigfoot. So people have found bodies in the woods. Bigfoot has been killed and pulled out. That information has been suppressed. But a big part of the reason why people have not seen Sasquatch or Bigfoot more than they have, and a big reason why there isn't been an even greater abundance of evidence, and why this creature is so good at eluding human beings, is because of the fact that these things, there is a supernatural or paranormal side to this thing. I think that there's been a lot of credible evidence that Bigfoot does have some level of paranormal abilities, and the most prominent one has been called mind speak. People have they've given testimony where they've been in the woods and they've encountered these things, and this thing will be speaking to them through their minds. There's a very strong paranormal aspect to this creature, and that, whether you want to call that a demonic thing or not, I think as Christians we need to be, that's something that we need to understand. There's a real spiritual side to this creature, and we really need to be, if we ever encounter this thing or we're thinking of trying to encounter this thing, we really got to be covered in prayer and have spiritual protection. There's a really strong spiritual thing here that we really need to be under the grace of God, protected by the power of Jesus Christ. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more at the end. But when you're hearing this, you need to be thinking like, okay, like we need to really be on guard and really understand spiritual warfare and really understand that there really needs to be a spiritual covering that we need to have if we're anywhere even in the vicinity of these creatures. Because when we hear that paranormal, we really need to be on guard. I really believe that. But yeah, I think that part of the reason, I think Bigfoot I believe these things, they operate in clans, they have a social structure, they're out in the woods, they operate, they live, they're physical creatures. So when I say I believe there's a supernatural, a spiritual side to Bigfoot, but that it's still a physical creature. This is what's getting into what's called the preternatural. And that when you hear that word preternatural, that's something that's both physical, there's a physical and a spiritual or supernatural side. It's a both fan. So it's not a phantom, it's not a ghost, an apparition, it's not a floating phasm. It's a physical creature. You could grab it, you could shoot it. This thing is in the world, it's physical, but there's this supernatural, spiritual, paranormal side to it. It's a preternatural creature. So yeah, I think that it has the ability to mind speak, but it also has the ability to paranormally know when human beings are coming. And I've listened to researchers who have studied this thing for years, and they say that these things operate in clans, and they'll have certain Bigfoot watching for human beings coming, and they have an extreme emphasis that they want to avoid human beings, and they have a real aversion to technology. They hate cameras. They hate audio recording devices. They really want to avoid these things. And how they are able to understand all that, I don't know. I don't, but they really do seem to have that ability to paranormally, psychically, supernaturally perceive that we're coming, and they will get out of the vicinity of human beings. So yeah, there is that psychic supernatural ability to understand that we're coming, and they will avoid us. When I when I listened to Ken Walker, he made a I forget what it's called, what he does. He made a model of Bigfoot, like a full on model of it, and he's talked about Sasquatch on the internet. And he made the point, which I thought was very astute. He believes that oftentimes when human beings do see Bigfoot, it will be because a mother, like the children, are out exposed, and the mother will actually come out of hiding to avert the gaze of humans away from where the kids are hiding. That's what he believes. I think he might operate from a somewhat more secular perspective, but I thought that was a very astute point. He said he believes that when you watch the Patterson Gimlin film, that when you see Patty walking, that she was trying to divert their gaze away from where her young may have been hiding away. That may be true. That may not be true. But I thought that actually sounded pretty credible to me. That made a lot of sense. And when you get into the world of Sasquatch, Bigfoot, there's all sorts of weird stories. There have been people who have talked about how these things have been. There's been connections to UFOs and the Greys. When you get into the really really wacky side of it, you really get into some people have said that these Greys, and I think these Greys are demonic entities in their own right. That's I've talked about that in other videos, but some people have believed that the Sasquatch are even kind of enslaved by these quote aliens. Some people have talked about them being taken up on UFOs. People have talked about how they've seen Sasquatch vanish before their eyes. There is all sorts of weird supernatural stories connected to Bigfoot. And this is why Bigfoot, aliens, they've really been put in the paranormal genre alongside ghosts and haunted houses. And this is a big reason why Christians have really historically have avoided those type of topics, and I understand that to a certain extent, because you do need to be very careful. You don't want to get you need to be careful to not get obsessed with the paranormal. I don't think it's wrong to have a belief in Bigfoot and to do some research if you're careful. I think you need to just cover yourself in prayer. But I do understand that sentiment. I get it. I think there's wisdom in that to a large extent, but I'm not going to say that you can't have. I mean, if it's real, it's real, and we gotta live in this world. You got to make heads or tails of it. So, I mean, if you have someone who saw it in the woods, and a lot of times people have gone to the church, they have gone to, and they're looking for answers, and their the pastors, whoever, they'll just say something along the lines of, "Don't talk about it." and that doesn't help them all that much. If this thing has been, if you have an experience, you encounter it, this thing has been kind of thrust into your life, as it were. At that point, everybody just telling you just avoid it, don't even look into it. Like, that's not really helpful for anybody. So I understand the sentiment. I think there is wisdom in that, but I mean, I think if you're just going to say we're not going to have any understanding of it at all, I think that's taking it too far the other way. But yeah, that being said, I've talked about the social structures. I think these things operate in clans. The big question that comes up are these things benevolent? Are they evil? Whatever. Some people have legitimately had experiences where they'll encounter Bigfoot, and it's not necessarily threatening or evil. Some people on farms, whatever, have said that it's come up, and it's actually been somewhat benevolent, and people will relay stories that are actually somewhat positive. And then other people have talked about stories about these things will terrorize people. They've been in cabins, and Sasquatch have thrown rocks against the side of the cabins or the doors, and they've really terrified people, really, really living off fear. If these things really are connected to the Genesis 6 paradigm, the Nephilim, the giants. I know the Nephilim, the term Nephilim is technically refers specifically to the pre-flood giants. But if that's true, then in God's eyes, they're viewed as an abomination. If you watch my video, Giants in the Bible, if you understand the entire arc of the Bible with the giants, the pre-flood giants, the post-flood giants, and the demons, it's very clear these things are described as enemies of God. They are not what God intended. They are in that sense an abomination. And I think if we're really understanding that thing, even though some of them may be more evil than others, just as some human beings are more evil than others, I think that we have to classify these things as enemies of God. I think that's just the conclusion we have to come to. And it seems like these things are becoming more prominent. More and more people are seeing them. They're showing up in the woods. It seems like these things are massing in the woods. Like, these things are being seen more and more in our national parks and our state parks. And it just seems like there's a proliferation of these things. Cryptid sightings the past few years have just exploded. They've gone through the roof. People are not just Bigfoot, but other types of cryptids too. Dogman, Mothman, gray aliens. Like, these things are exploding. UFOs. It's just getting to the point where more and more people are being forced to confront these types of issues because they've just absolutely exploded. But I think we really need to understand these things are becoming more prevalent. And yeah, I think if you're gonna go out in the woods at all, even if you're not quote looking for Bigfoot, especially if you get into, there are dangerous things in the woods. Sasquatch can be dangerous. There are other cryptids in the woods that are very dangerous. Um, I would really recommend cover yourself in prayer. If you feel like you can go into the woods in there's liberty of conscience. If you feel you can go into the woods in good conscience, please go. I go into the woods. I've gone into the woods multiple times this past year. I pray over it every time. But if you feel like the Lord is telling you not to go, please, please be responsive to that. Have wisdom. Cover yourself in prayer. You know, let the Holy Spirit lead you as He will. Yeah, and if you feel like God is calling you to research Bigfoot, and I feel like to a large extent that is one component of what God's been calling me to research giants, the mounds, ancient archaeology, anthropology. Bigfoot is a part of that. I feel like that's the direction God's been leading me this past year. I believe that Christians are called to look into these things. And if you feel that God is calling you to go in that direction, I would say please be careful and please cover yourself in prayer, and please let God and the Holy Spirit lead you. And if you feel like God is not leading you to look into those things, and if you feel like God is not calling you to research those things, then it may be best to avoid these things altogether. And obviously, God knows our hearts. If we're doing these things to honor the Lord Jesus Christ and to to understand these things for the glory of God and to help people that need this information. That's a good thing. But if we're doing these things just to be exhilarated and looking for a thrill, that's probably not very wise, and that's probably not very God honoring. So I'm not going to tell everybody where they need to draw their lines. I'm going to leave that between you all, the viewers, and the Lord. But I would just say that please take all these things to the Lord, cover yourself, and please just don't be foolish. That's part of the reason why it's actually good to tell people about Bigfoot, because there are dangerous things in the woods. And if you're a watchman on the wall, the principle is, we see this principle in scripture time and again. If the watchman tells everybody, gives the warning of what is out there, and they do not heed the warning, that blood is not on the hands of the watchman because he was faithful to his duty. But if the watchman does not blow the horn of warning and does not tell them, and the people are destroyed without giving warning, then the blood is actually on the hands of the watchman. This is the scriptural principle. So, for example, if I, Joe Harper, have come to believe in the reality of Bigfoot, and I do not tell that to others as God would call me to do, and people are harmed by that or harmed by other cryptids in the woods, if I have not done my duty, then there's something on my head. There's something to be said. You have been negligent in what I have had for you to do. But on the flip side, if I do it and people do not heed it of their own accord, then I've been faithful to what I'm called to do. And so that's a big reason why it's important to talk about Bigfoot. It's not that everybody's going to be a researcher. It's not that everybody's going to be spending day and night reading books and going out in the woods and looking for it. But this is a big thing why we need to have some basic understanding of these things, because these things are real and these things affect people. And even if we try to ignore it, that doesn't mean those realities are going to go away. But I digress. So anyway, this has been my coverage of Bigfoot. I've talked about kind of some of the evidence for Bigfoot. I've talked about some of the theories of what it is. I've talked about some of the abilities connected to it. But I really do believe, just to sum it up, that the final line is, I really do think that this creature is connected in one way, shape, or form to the giants, the Nephilim, the Genesis 6 narrative. And I think that makes it relevant in a biblical sense. Some people may disagree with me on that. They may not see it that way. Obviously, it's different from a giant. It's not the same thing as a giant. So there's some distinguishment there. But that's kind of where I'm coming down with it at this point. My views could change with time as I continue to research, but that's where I'm coming down with it at this point. So as I always say, guys, don't take my word for it. Do your own thinking. Do your own research. Take these things to the Lord in prayer. Come to your own conclusions. And that's all we can do if we're seeking to be discerning and to seek the truth out, and the Lord's going to honor that. So all that being said, guys, this is Joe Harper with Reformed Truth and Ministries. God bless. If you've enjoyed this video, then check out our website at www.reformedtruther.com.